Hello, my name is Christopher Samuell and I work at Hannan University in Osaka, Japan. Today I'm going to talk to you about research concerning Japanese students' study abroad participation. As it says in the title, this is a proposal. Originally this research was designed as part of my doctorate program, but unfortunately due to the COVID-19 pandemic I was unable to carry out the research collecting data with real students because there was nobody participating in study abroad at the time. So instead I designed this piece of research and I want to share it to hopefully give people some ideas of how you could carry out this kind of research at your own university or school. Today's presentation will be divided into 5 sections. First, introduction, discussing briefly why it is important to continue to scrutinize study abroad programs and their effects on Japanese students. Then discussing some areas of study with regard to study abroad, such as cross-cultural communication, linguistic improvements due to study abroad, and some limitations of study abroad. Then I will move on to the proposed research focus and aims. Broadly speaking, today's presentation is concerned with how participation in study abroad programs affects Japanese students' linguistic ability, and whether improved linguistic ability leads to heightened interest in intercultural communication and internationalization. Then I will discuss in more detail the proposed research design, specifically talking about methods of data collection and data analysis, validity and reliability. Finally, some closing comments discussing some implications, limitations and conclusions of the study. First, introduction. So why do we need to study abroad experiences? As globalization continues at an ever-growing pace, the movement of people, ideas, information, and capital across borders is increasingly commonplace. With this rise in cross-cultural contact, it follows that the fostering of cross-cultural understanding is important. In response, there is a noticeable expectation for university students in Japan to develop cross-cultural communicative competencies, as well as English proficiency. However, concerns over Japanese students falling behind fellow Asian students in terms of English proficiency remain. The shortage of students with cross-cultural competencies is viewed as an issue for Japanese economic prosperity and its position as an industrial leader. This shift has led to a growing number of universities offering study abroad programs, which play an essential role in promoting open-mindedness and cultural awareness. With an aim to internationalize higher education in Japan, the Japanese government promotes study abroad through programs such as Tobetate Japan and the Top Global University Project, as shown here. The Top Global University Project, often referred to as TGUP, has the goal of leading the internationalization of Japan's education by reforming personnel and educational systems, enhancing educational systems to help students develop the ability to act globally, and accelerating other globalization initiatives. Tobetate Japan is another program that gives students the opportunity to study abroad in a variety of countries, and as it is not associated with any particular institution, it is open to a wide variety of students. Tobetate Japan encourages students to go global and to act as ambassadors for Japan, evangelists, and as global leaders. While government-sponsored study abroad programs such as TGUP and Tobetate are featured quite prominently in government literature, they are not the only study abroad program providers in the country. Indeed, the TGUP comprises only 30 universities in a country of close to 700. In addition to this, there are certain linguistic requirements for participation in some of the Tobetate Japan programs. And as of 2019, it was noted that only 42.6% of third-year high school students have achieved the government-stipulated goal of passing the Eiken Pre-2 test, meaning that participation in some of these programs may prove to be quite difficult. In addition to this, it has been shown that there is little research examining the outcomes of study abroad with regard to both linguistic and intercultural competencies. This sentiment is echoed by Tarrant, Rubin, and Stoner when noting that few studies have used experimental designs adequate for documenting the value addition of studying abroad, that is, learning outcomes above and beyond that which may be achieved in domestic or traditional campus-based courses. Therefore, it may be a good idea for institutions to carry out their own research on their own study abroad programs and their own student experiences. And that is where this proposed small-scale study may come in useful for teachers or researchers. Next, let's look at some areas of study with regard to study abroad. Participation in study abroad programs can promote linguistic competence, open-mindedness, and cultural awareness. Participation has also been shown to improve certain soft skills, such as cross-cultural understanding and communication, as well as allowing students to learn firsthand about other countries' culture, society, and history. Therefore, pressure falls on Japanese universities to cultivate jinsai, or global human resources, to produce culturally competent graduates who can exploit English to compete in diverse business sectors. Through this, we can see the importance of study abroad programs to Japanese education and industry. Williams has explored the impact of study abroad on students' intercultural communication skills, suggesting that several recurring themes determine intercultural communication skills and competency. These are open-mindedness, cultural empathy or non-judgmental perceptiveness, personal autonomy, and resourcefulness. She suggests that to be an effective intercultural communicator, learners must exhibit an understanding of cultural communication differences, an ability to overcome those barriers, and a desire to use those skills. She does, however, suggest that increases to cross-cultural communication can be challenging to quantify. She suggests that many studies consist of somewhat anecdotal evidence, which brings us back to the previous quote from Tarrant, Rubin, and Stoner, suggesting that few studies have used experimental designs to explore the value addition of studying abroad. Let's look at linguistic improvements due to study abroad. Study abroad programs can also provide students with a new learning context within which to improve not only their intercultural communication, but also their linguistic ability. Within the body of research pertaining to second and foreign language acquisition, there is evidence that learning context can be a determining factor for successful L2 acquisition. Various elements are impacted by the learning environment, including quality and quantity of input, opportunities for practicing the L2, and the form of L2 instruction. This is one area in which study abroad offers a unique context for Japanese students to learn a foreign language. It has been theorized that study abroad has the potential to enhance language learning in every dimension, including proficiency, fluency, communicative competence, and strategic or discourse abilities. Successful language learning depending on access to learning environments and students taking an active role in their learning by evaluating what they have learnt and attempting to incorporate new language into their repertoire. An awareness of personal progress, or lack thereof, is also essential for students to measure growth during study abroad. It has been noted that after initial difficulty, study abroad participants become aware of improvements after being successfully understood within group settings or upon realization that efforts were bearing fruit. This self-realization acts as a key driver for successful language learning. Study abroad experiences can be described as a wake-up call for many participants in terms of their L2 ability and their engagement as a global citizen. This link between improvement in L2 ability and increased engagement as a global citizen is exactly the focus of the currently proposed study, as it will endeavour to establish a link between the two phenomena. Although it is clear that study abroad programs provide benefits for students, the opposite can also be true. If learners are not adequately prepared pre-departure, immersion in the L2 may act as a hindrance in which learners feel that they were not sufficiently academically prepared, particularly in terms of foreign language ability, to study overseas. According to JASO and JAFSA, data indicates that many Japanese university students cannot acquire the level of English proficiency required to take courses at universities of English-speaking countries through normal English language education provided by Japanese schools and universities. Without this foundational L2 proficiency, students have difficulties establishing relationships with native speakers and tend to associate with peers that share the same first language, limiting their exposure to naturalistic L2. Even with limited L2 proficiency, if Japanese students can enjoy their time studying abroad, increases in confidence and motivation can lead to a willingness to communicate and improved contact with L2 outside of the classroom. Let's move on to proposed research focus and aims. The following research question serves as the crux of the proposed study. The research question is, how participation in a study abroad program affects Japanese students' linguistic ability, and whether improved linguistic ability leads to heightened interest in intercultural communication and internationalization. As a small-scale study, the proposed study perhaps lacks the scope to provide definitive answers to these questions, though through the use of the proposed mixed methods design and a focus on Japanese students directly, it is hoped that the findings of this study could establish a link between improved linguistic ability, first-hand exposure to foreign cultures, and attitudes towards intercultural communication. Now let's look at the proposed research design. The study will be a sequential, exploratory, mixed methods design consisting of two phases, a pre-departure and post-departure phase. Each phase will consist of a qualitative interview and a quantitative language ability test. Let's look at some pre-departure interview questions. While these are just my suggestions, you may wish to change the questions based on your students' own experiences, but what's important to remember is the pre- and post-departure interview questions need to be as similar as possible so that they may be compared. With that said, here are my suggestions for some possible pre-departure interview questions. Why did students choose to participate in a study abroad program? What did the students hope to achieve through participation in the program? Improvements to linguistic ability? Improvements to intercultural communication? Anything else, or all of the above? What are students' views on intercultural communication? Is intercultural communication an important skill for Japanese university students to learn? How can you achieve effective intercultural communication? How do you feel about Japan's continued internationalization? Here are my suggestions for post-departure interview questions. What did students achieve through their participation in a study abroad program? Improvements to linguistic ability? Improvements to intercultural communication? Was there any value added by participating in the program that they would not have been able to achieve had they stayed on campus? What are students' views on intercultural communication? Is intercultural communication an important skill for Japanese university students to learn? How can you achieve effective intercultural communication? And how do you feel about Japan's continued internationalization? Finally, how would they describe their experience to other students who are interested in participating in study abroad programs in the future? As this is a mixed methods research design, along with the qualitative interview questions, there will also be a quantitative language test which will gauge the students' pre- and post-study abroad English ability. Results will then be measured against the interview data to ascertain whether there exists a link between improvements in linguistic ability and heightened interest in intercultural communication and internationalization. As this is a somewhat experimental area of research, a sequential exploratory mixed methods design was deemed appropriate as they are primarily concerned with discovery and with generating or building a new theory. The main focus of an exploratory design is to explore issues in detail to gain a better understanding of the problem under scrutiny. Therefore, while the study proposed here may not provide conclusive answers, it may provide new insights into study abroad. To ensure the results' comparability, both the pre- and post phases will be as similar as possible. Regarding interviews, questions will change from investigating predictions based on previous knowledge to probing lived study abroad experience. To facilitate direct comparisons, the pre- and post-language tests will be identical. Pre-departure interviews will investigate what students hope to achieve through participation in a study abroad program, as well as their views on intercultural communication. The test stage, consisting of an English language test, will quantify the student's current linguistic ability. The semi-structured interview will gauge areas where the students hope to improve throughout their study abroad program. This data will then be used to create the English language test. By testing students on areas in which they wish to improve specifically, it is hoped that the data will address the research question comprehensively, providing a link between learner improvements, or a lack thereof, and study abroad experiences. It is essential to use the qualitative data to inform the quantitative stage of the study, as the data sets help explain each other, an element vital to sequential mixed methods designs. For data collection and analysis, both pre- and post-study abroad data collection phases will consist of the semi-structured interviews and a language test. The language test will take the form of a web-based multiple-choice test for reading, listening, grammar, and vocabulary. There will then be a separate communicative ability test administered either via online software such as Microsoft Teams or Zooms, or ideally, if circumstances permit, face-to-face on campus. Now, let's look in more detail at the qualitative data collection and analysis. Researchers tend to rely on interviews to acquire unique, non-standardized, and personalized information about participant worldviews. Therefore, interviews represent the most appropriate data collection method for this study, as the main focus of the qualitative phase is to uncover students' views regarding their experiences on study abroad. Through interviews, researchers gain a greater insight into the participant views, and in this way, the process can be an exciting and enriching experience, leading to detailed descriptions of study abroad. Interviews enable the researcher to probe for information and clarification, meaning they are well suited for the exploration of the perceptions and opinions of respondents regarding complex and sometimes sensitive issues. Of the various interview formats considered for this study, semi-structured interviews were selected. Semi-structured interviews are beneficial given their adaptability to almost any research setting, versatility, and flexibility. The elicitation of detailed responses is undoubtedly crucial to this study. Yet, it is also vital to ensure that the participants experience the interviews in a way that facilitates comparison between respondents. Therefore, an interview guide will be created to center the interviews on research themes and predict the depth of information to be collected. The interview guide will include both questions and a list of topics to be covered, allowing the researcher to jump back and forth based on participant responses. For the analysis, thematic analysis will be employed. Thematic analysis can detect and identify factors or variables raised by the participants and determine the relationships between concepts to facilitate comparison with existing data. By using thematic analysis, there is a possibility to link the various concepts and opinions of the learners and compare these with the data that has been generated in a different situation at different times during the project. All possibilities for interpretation are possible.
Thematic analysis identifies themes within data that capture meaning relevant to the research questions, while attempting to create links between the identified themes. It thereby attempts to describe the participants' social reality through the systematic process of coding and examining collected data, attempting to uncover subjective meanings and social realities. Quantitative data collection. This phase will consist of a pre- and post-departure language test. They serve as vital benchmarks for progress in a given linguistic area. In the proposed study, language tests provide insight into which proficiencies, if any, have improved. Having the students take the same tests will allow the researcher to assess progress while comparing performance between the pre- and post-departure test scores. The tests will consist of 5 sections to provide a comprehensive overview of the pre- and post-departure English ability. A reading, listening, grammar, and vocabulary section will be part of a combined online multiple-choice test. This format enables as many students as possible to take the test when they feel comfortable doing so. The test will be timed to minimize the opportunities for cheating, but this cannot account for the inherent weaknesses of multiple-choice tests such as random guessing, which could potentially lead to false data. As the students will be participating in the test voluntarily, it is the researcher's opinion that cheating will not be an issue. Yet it is certainly worth considering the possibility of such data emerging from the study. There will be 3 response options for each of the multiple choice questions, as it has been suggested that this is the optimal number of choices in such a test with regard to difficulty. Although multiple choice testing provides easily comparable and quantifiable data, due to the somewhat subjective nature of a communicative test in the form of an interview, this part of the testing process will require more scrutiny to score the students fairly. A strict rubric will be put in place outlining the scales and criteria of assessment and how scores will be allocated to produce clearly quantifiable data that can be integrated with that of the multiple choice question tests. For data analysis, although quantitative data tends to be objective, the choice of methods analysis should reflect the type of data to be produced. In the present case, pre- and post-departure language tests will produce interval data with 2 comparable data sets. A paired t-test is the most appropriate tool for analyzing this data, as it is perhaps the most widely used method of comparison between 2 data sets. This method is commonly used to compare groups that are meaningfully related in some way. Finally, t-tests are appropriate for inquiries with small sample sizes, approximately or less than 30, such as in the present study. While carrying out data analysis, it is also important to consider the validity and reliability of the tests. Closing comments. Why do we need such research? There will be a continued push for competency-based evaluations and tests to measure the outcomes of study abroad, and without concrete evidence of positive outcomes, they may be in danger of losing credence. Potential outcomes. By establishing a link between increases in linguistic proficiency and a heightened interest in intercultural communication, policymakers could use this information when promoting the benefits of study abroad programs to students and when enacting new policy that may affect how higher educational institutes in Japan continue to cultivate cross-cultural competencies in their learners. Further, depending on the findings of the study, data could also be used to create more focused pre-departure preparation programs to further enhance students' study abroad experiences by identifying commonly occurring issues that arise through analysis of the pre- and post-departure data. Finally, even if there is no link established between linguistic improvements and intercultural communication, the qualitative interviews may still provide useful data that may help to illuminate any other common factors amongst students who had both positive and negative experiences with regards to intercultural communication while studying abroad. Thank you very much for listening.